Hello, my name's Philip Dawson and I'd like to talk with you about lectures for learning information, and as you'll find out, that's a very specific title. So one of the most common mistakes by lecturers is to use the lecture method at all. Oh dear, I'm telling this to you in a lecture. I hope I'm not making a mistake here. I am a lecturer, I give lectures, this all feels quite okay. Let's find out what the problems might be. So in this video, I'm going to tell you some educational folklore about lectures. We're also going to talk about what are lectures good for from a more evidence-based perspective. We're going to talk cognition in lectures, and then active processing. How do we get students to do stuff in lectures? Let's start with the education folklore, get that out of the way. So you should speak clearly. Maybe not with that nasal tone you have in your voice or whatever else it is that makes your voice unique. You should enunciate everything perfectly. You should be nice. I'm nice, I hope you can tell, I'll smile at you. You should show enthusiasm. I love this stuff. I hope you can tell. If not, I'll fake it. You should plan ahead. Have your slides all sorted out, have practiced it, rehearsed. You should have less than X slides, where X is usually less than the number of slides I have. I always seem to break these rules. You should make eye contact. You should tell jokes. Cater to visual, auditory, kinesthetic learners. Maybe do a dance in there or get the students to do a dance. You should include lots of fascinating anecdotes. I heard this anecdote once, it was really interesting. So this is all education folklore, and there's so much more of it out there as well. Now guaranteed some of this stuff is true, but some of it isn't as well, and I don't really have a lot of evidence before me to distinguish which bits are true and which bits aren't true, so I'm not going to focus on most of this. I will, however, let you know that learning styles don't exist. So don't waste your resources based on some assumption that these students are visual learners and these students are audio learners and these students are kinesthetic learners, because they're not. No research has actually shown that some students are one or the other. It just makes nice intuitive sense that, oh, I'm a visual learner or whatever. It's nice to be introspective and give yourself a label, or to label students, but there's not evidence to support this, and in addition there's evidence to refute learning styles' existence. If you disagree, get yourself $1,000. I've got a link up there to a challenge where if you can conduct a reasonable research experiment that demonstrates learning styles exist, you'll get yourself $1,000. I think you would also put yourself in good stead for some really amazing research prizes, because all of the research to date indicates learning styles do not exist. So don't waste your resources on them. So if learning is what the student does, then how do we get the students to do stuff is really part of the focus of today. And another focus is that content covered is not content learned. Have you ever been in one of those lectures where the lecturer has sort of clicked through a few slides in rapid succession and not really focused on them, or maybe just read the words on those slides, but you didn't learn it? So the lecturer may have covered the content, but you may not have necessarily learned it. So I also put it to you that lectures are not always bad. Lectures cop a lot of flack lately, don't they? People talk about the death of lectures, how good teaching does not involve lectures. I don't think this is correct. I think lectures are not always bad. I think they have their place. So what is their place? What's the use of lectures? Well, Bly conducted a fairly extensive and rigorous synthesis of research on this topic. Yes, it is a little dated. That's from 2000. So the lecture is as effective as other methods to transmit information. And I put it to you that if your goal is to transmit information, you could transmit that to someone one-on-one, or you could transmit it in a lecture theatre of 500 students. And roughly, lectures are going to be of similar effectiveness to do that transmission. So you'd rather do it in the 500 student lecture theatre than 500 times one-on-one. So they can be pretty efficient. Most lectures, however, are not as effective as discussion to promote thought. So if you want students to engage deeply, to think about things on higher levels of some sort of learning outcomes taxonomy, like in solo, you want them to think at extended abstract, lectures are not great for that. Discussion's probably the better approach. Lectures are ineffective, so they don't really work for social or personal development. So a student developing their ability to work with others, for instance, or to teach values, to develop their knowledge of the ethics of the discipline, or these things that are really important to what it is to be a teacher or a nurse. It's important to hold these certain values. Lectures are not great to communicate that or instill that. To inspire interest, to make you want to be a passionate teacher. A lecture on a whole is not a great way to do that inspiring thing. And teach behavioural skills, to develop your ability to do a particular task. A lecture is not a great thing for that. So in this lecture, I'm going to focus on transmitting information, and we're going to focus that transmission on transmitting information, because that's the most efficient and effective way to use a lecture. For those other things, I encourage you to consider other forms of teaching, and we'll discuss those in another video. So, guidance is also important, and guidance is sort of what can make lectures great. Withholding information from people can actually hurt their learning. So a lot of these sort of trendy methods, such as constructivist discovery, problem-based, experiential and inquiry-based learning, kind of withhold information from students. Whereas lectures don't. Lectures tell them the information. And I'll tell you a bit of information about this study now. Just hold on. So, although unguided or minimally guided instructional approaches are very popular and intuitively appealing, the point is made that those approaches ignore both the structures that constitute human cognitive architecture and evidence from empirical studies over the past half-century that consistently indicate that minimally guided instruction is less effective and less efficient than instructional approaches that place a strong emphasis on guidance of the student learning process. The advantage of guidance begins to recede only when learners have sufficiently higher prior knowledge to provide internal guidance. Okay, so bad lectures can still be bad. That was some bad lecturing, wasn't it? Just then, I was doing that sin of lecturing, of just reading the words verbatim off the slide. We've been there in that class. As the student, we've been there. We've heard someone do that. As the teacher, you might have been there as well. You might have been the one reading off the slide. You know it's wrong at the time. It doesn't feel quite right, but you can't think of another way to do it. So that's bad lecturing there. And bad lecturing can be bad. So I said before, not all lectures are bad. Some lectures and some moments in lectures like that can be bad. So content covered does not equal content learned. I covered all of the content on that previous slide. So you should be able to know, how human cognitive architecture was important there. But let's say you didn't know what human cognitive architecture was. Let's say I went through it at too fast a pace. Let's say you needed me to sort of slow down, go back to that other bit, or let's say you found the slides distracting, or whatever else. I challenge you to tell me now, what was the main point of that lecture, that slide? What are some of the sub-points of that slide? It's really hard. Content covered does not necessarily equal content learned. I don't know if you learned anything from that slide. So let's jump onto this 7 plus or minus 2. Now you might have heard a figure like this before. It's this idea that we can hold within our heads roughly 7 things at any given time, plus or minus 2. So what's a thing? Well, what a thing is really varies from person to person based on, what you know. So for me, the concept of 7 plus or minus 2 there is a thing. For you, that number there, 7, might be one thing, the plus or minus symbol might be another thing, and the 2 might be another thing. So that's 3 things. Let's say we take this out of this context and think about learning to play a musical instrument. Let's say you're learning to play guitar. For me, the C chord on a guitar is one thing. For you, however, if you've never played the C chord on a guitar, well, that's going to take you 3 fingers to do. Each of those 3 fingers, you've got to know which fret to put it on and which string to put it on. So we're looking at probably about 6 things there, and if you add in some sort of a strumming motion of how to do that, there's your limitation of working memory right there. So if I tell you 2 chords, the C chord and an A minor chord, well gee, you're now hitting about 15 things you've got to keep in your head at any given time. So if you've ever wondered why it's so hard to learn something new like a new musical instrument, it comes off this notion of what is a thing you can keep in your working memory. So let's jump back to things like that slide before. Pacing was a real problem on that slide because a concept like human cognitive architecture was hard. Those words take up multiple of these chunks, whereas if you had more expertise in the area, the phrase human cognitive architecture might only be one thing. It might even be something you need to think about. So the limitation of working memory of 7 plus or minus 2 things you can keep in your head is influenced by expertise. Now there were some really interesting studies done on the difference between expert chess players and novice chess players. What they did was they got chessboards and they recreated scenes from classic chess games and really boring, mundane chess games as well. And they showed chunks of these boards to the novices and to the experts, and then got them to remember those and recreate them later on. Now the experts were able to recreate those chessboard segments so much more often than the novices were because of their expertise. They saw this chunk of a chessboard and it mapped to something they'd seen in a game before, whereas the novice was just remembering bits on the board that seemed kind of random. When they just chucked chess pieces on the board in seemingly random positions, the people conducting the study, and then got the novices and the experts to remember this, well, there was really no difference between the novices and the experts in how well they remembered it, because the experts were expert at remembering realistic things on a chessboard. So their expertise was relatively narrow. It wasn't that they were experts at remembering where pieces go on chessboards, it's that they were expert at recognising familiar things. So the chord on the guitar, the meaningful position of pieces on a chessboard, or even that word there, expertise, we recognise these things based on existing schemas we have from having done a lot of work with these things. You see the word expertise there. Do you see E-X-P-E-R-T-I-S-E? Do you see 9 things there? Or do you see one thing? I'm guessing you see one thing, one word, expertise. If you were a novice English language learner, you might see 9 things and have to use all of your working memory at any given time to deal with it. So we've got to think about students' expertise and how that influences pacing as we're going. Maybe one big new concept each slide rather than 10 new concepts. Words and visuals is another thing. Research suggests that we have separate channels for dealing with primarily linguistic information and visual spatial information. So if we can capitalise on that, we might be able to say have visual support materials on a slide that we talk to students about. And this helps us deal with the limitations of working memory and seductive details. If there are 7 key bits of information that I think I can fit, I think I've pitched right at your level of expertise, but then I throw in a whole bunch of seductive, colourful, fluffy bits of information, they're going to push out some of the stuff you really need to know. Modern research around a thing called cognitive load theory supports these ideas on this slide. If you're interested, I have some support materials available. They're linked from this video. So bad lectures can be bad. We had the bad slide here. It makes those problems of pacing, it makes those problems of expertise really shine through to us. And empirical research, randomised controlled trials, suggests that we should avoid reading long text excerpts from slides like this. And the effect size was 1.15 in favour of just reading rather than reading the text that's up on the slide. What that 1.15 means is that students who were subjected to that horrible PowerPoint crime just then of reading everything on there versus students who were just read to, the ones who were just read to performed 1.15 standard deviations above the mean compared with the students who had the reading and the text. So this is in a transfer test where they're transferring their learnings from there to a new domain. We can also try narration of short text excerpts with pauses. Reading directly off the slides is not banned. You're allowed to do it. It's okay. I'd be in deep trouble if it was banned. The effect size of doing this was 1.62. So comparing what I did just then, the short text excerpts with the pauses, with just audio, 1.62 standard deviations better for reading the short bits and having some pauses. And of course, as we said before, you can just have the blank slide or a picture or no PowerPoint and just narrate with no text. So if your choices are to either read directly off the slides or not have slides, don't have slides and you can expect dramatic improvements in learning. And there's some summary resources up there for you. I've got a link to a resource I created. I've talked about recommendations for written and spoken text, but there's also some recommendations for text, graphics, and audio. Now these all include links to the evidence and some tips on how to interpret those sorts of research studies. Okay. Yeah, this is cool. I'll just, yeah, I've recorded this before. Just a bit of guitar to go along with it. So, research suggests that superfluous but interesting information hurts learning. So when you have a bunch of complicated, distracting visuals, audio, text, logos, background noises, kind of blurring things, some incorrect dates. Anyway, superfluous but interesting information hurts learning. I'm sorry for what I just did then, where I was kind of distracting with all those things. I even ended up distracting myself. But it kind of got to this whole point, didn't it, that having these students here doing something that's totally unrelated to what I'm after, having the university logo, having that annoying break on the text there, having the date that's wrong, having my name on the slide even, was all detracting away from the core principle I'm trying to communicate. The core thing I'm trying to communicate here is that superfluous but fascinating and interesting information hurts learning. So students actually learn more from less. My advice to you is to weed your lectures, omit the anecdotes, the fascinating story, but keep the example. The way where you're working through this problem, both might come from your years of interesting industry experience, but the anecdote, you can't figure out how to latch it onto the learning outcome. The example you can. The anecdote, the students don't know how it connects to the assessment. The example might be a similar problem to something they're going to face in the assessment. So omit the anecdotes, keep the examples. With time and some deep thought, you'll figure out the difference. Omit the extraneous visuals. That superfluous picture on the previous slide. I wasn't talking about what those students were doing as if it was useful. It wasn't a diagram to explain what I was saying. But if you do have a diagram, that could be great as well. And in a sense, I was cheating on the previous slide because it was a textbook example of bad diagrams. But if you do have diagrams, use them. If you have the process chart that explains things, explains that theory and how the pieces relate, use it. Omit detailed quantitative results. If you have a table on a slide with 20 numbers and lots of stars that's linked to detailed statistical significance results and whatever, omit that. Students will not remember it. And it will actually hurt their learning of the qualitative explanations. The fact that this number is big or small is more important in a lecture than what the number is. The fact that this number is bigger than this number, or this changes and leads to that happening, is more important than the 20 values in the table. Omit unnecessary music and sounds. I hope I tortured you on that previous slide with this slightly out of tune guitar. But even really nice music can hurt learning, and it also hurts productivity. If you think you write better with music, the research doesn't agree with you. You might enjoy writing more though, so I'm not going to tell you not to. But keep signalling with your voice. Don't be monotonous. Don't think that because music or audio doesn't help that you can't signal and show that enthusiasm. You can. And omit the non-essential material and keep the essential material. If there's an idea that doesn't relate to the learning outcomes, or a notion that you'd like students to sort of get, but you always end up clicking through that slide, maybe consider getting rid of it. So learning is what the student does. How do we get them to do? Well, these cognitive transmission principles are good for up to about 20 minutes. We might be around the 20-minute mark right now, and your attention might be fading. For more than 20 minutes, always incorporate active processing, doing, getting students to do stuff with what you've been transmitting. Think, pair, share is one approach. Get them to think about something for a minute. Might be an answer to a question you've posed, might be a little essay on something, a paragraph. Then pair, get them to collaborate, combine their answers, and then share with the big group. Use voting, clickers, tweets, or another technological back channel. Even just get people to put their hands up to say whether they agree with something or not. And then maybe start challenging about why. These things could actually draw them back on task, draw them back on topic, get them engaged again. Problem solving. Maybe you've demonstrated how to solve a particular problem, get them to solve one of them. Maybe even while you're working for your question is still up on the board. That can be a really effective approach. And consider all students. If you say to me, but Phil, when I lecture, there's these 5 guys and they always debate with me and ask me questions and it's really lively, it's fantastic. I'm going to say to you, what about the other 95? Where's their active processing? Although you might feel great having this lively academic discussion, the majority of the students in that room are maybe a little bit more engaged than before, but they're still not actively doing with the material. So let's lastly think about the lecture. We have lectures, we love them, I love them, I'm giving one now. We can flip the lecture. See what I did there? You can think of this as a flipped lecture in that you watch this in your own time and then you might get together with other people and talk about it. That's generally the idea of the flipped classroom. Generally, the flipped classroom is we take transmission out of our valuable face-to-face time, and in our valuable face-to-face time we have a discussion, we talk about it. That can be pretty effective. Even better, turn it into bite-sized lectures. See what I did there? Where we take these longer lectures and cut them down into smaller chunks. I like 20-25 minutes if I can. Some people like even shorter, about 10 minutes, usually with a call to action at the end. Or get rid of the lecture entirely. If your goal isn't to transmit information, maybe a lecture's not the best method for you. So, let's go back to what's the use of lectures? Well, transmitting information they're pretty good at. Not that great for promoting thought, not that great at all for social or personal development, teaching values, inspiring interest, teaching behavioural skills. When you're deciding what sort of classes to use for what you teach, always think back to the learning outcomes. They're the thing that should guide your mode of delivery. And we'll end on a bit of a challenge. PowerPoint features really prominently in lectures these days. But what's its role? Well, grab your 5 most recently presented slides and think about what was your goal on that slide. Was it to support cognition? All the stuff we talked about with the use of text, don't read the words verbatim on the slide, etc. Those were all intended to support cognition. But instead, was your goal for visual appeal? The slide with the Monash template with the superfluous graphic could arguably be for visual appeal. I think that's why that graphic is there. Was your goal for notes for you? Yeah, so you don't forget where you're up to, so that you remember all those key points. You know, you don't want to disadvantage the students. You want to make sure that they get a good experience by you knowing what to say. Was your goal that these slides are really just handouts for later? So I'll skip through those 4 or 5 slides in the middle because I ran out of time, but you've got them for later. You can follow up. They've got all the words on there. I wouldn't really be adding anything to them. Are they those sort of slides? Are they to communicate the curriculum so that when you get that question from the students, what's in the test, you can say what was in the lectures, which really translates to what was in the PowerPoint slides? Or are they for something else? Grab your 5 most recent slides and try and identify which one of these or none of these your goal was. I hope you'll find that interesting. And I hope you found the transmission of this information to you, well, at least interesting. I don't expect it's changed your behavioural skills as a lecturer, but I hope it's transmitted information about what lectures are good for and how we can make them better. Thanks a lot.